Okay, welcome back to part 2 of Hour of the Truth on the 30th of April 2015, and we will now go into the reading of the book, The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. And I will start with the introduction that was written by Walt Stickle from Grand Design Exposed in the beginning. And we will get through the whole book, but of course not today in all at once. I start reading, and whenever Walt thinks that he has something to add here to, then he will come and fill in the gaps that I maybe leave on here. So, the introduction of the book, The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. When reading this booklet, remember Ronald Cook wrote this in 1985. The world did not have a Jesuit pope. The founding of the Jesuits in 1534 was to counter the Reformation. Now, on September 23, 2015, a Jesuit pope, or a counter-reformator, is coming to America to speak to a joint session of Congress. What does this tell us in 2015? It reveals that the Christians are under a strong delusion with the teaching of futurism and are unaware that the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist is coming to address the lawmakers to celebrate the completion of the Jesuit counter-reformation in America. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. Quote, "And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie." End quote. Now understand, this introduction is not to take away from the author and the points made in his booklet. But remember, the author didn't know that in 2013 we would have a Jesuit pope. When writing The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, he had no idea that in 2015 the Jesuits would have complete charge of the Vatican and the Jesuit Pope would speak to a joint session of Congress in 2015. So when you read this, realize that the conspiracy is alive and well and proceeding on schedule. Now, Pedro Arupa, the Black Pope between 1963 to 1983, is mentioned on page 8, chapter 1, The Jesuits in History, in this booklet. Ronald Cook mentions author Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, using the Black Pope, Pedro Arupa, to identify conspiracies and give us the agenda of the conspirators. Here's a quote from the Black Pope, Jesuit Pedro Arupa.
This quote, I want to stop right there. I want to lay a little foundation because, listen, you know, when I read this is in his book. I'm bringing it up in the introduction so we have a clear head when Ronald Cook mentions it in his first chapter of the book. Understand, the listeners that are here, most of them understand who the Black Pope is. But York is getting the next two paragraphs as an actual quote from the Black Pope, and Gary Allen, and I have a picture of the cover of the book, and I read it years ago. None dare call it conspiracies. What is amazing is the misdirection. The misdirection. I had to ask several people. Am I reading this right? Is the Black Pope actually saying this? And now this is before York reads what the Black Pope said. This is in a book that's exposing conspiracies, blaming the globalists, blaming the elitists, blaming the bankers. It was a very popular book back in 1971. I didn't even know who the Jesuits were. But he is using the Black Pope to define conspiracies. Now go ahead and read that, and we'll make some comments after this, because this should be astonishing. This should get every one of us our attention. How deeply, how how evil, how deceiving this is to have the Black Pope. Here I'm writing a book about conspiracies, and I'm quoting the Black Pope. So read the exact words that Pedro Rupi said in his book.
Here it comes. Quote, "This godless society operates in an extremely efficient manner, at least in its higher levels of leadership. It makes use of every possible means at its disposal, be they scientific, technical, social, or economic. It follows a perfectly mapped-out strategy. It holds almost complete sway in international organizations, in financial circles, in the field of mass communications, press, cinema, radio, and television." End quote.
End quote of Pedro Rupi.
I think he speaks about his own society, right?
No, yes. And I'll make a comment. Read the next paragraph, and then we'll make a comment on that.
"The Black Pope, Pedro Arupe, gives a perfect description of how the biggest conspiracy on the earth works. He is actually describing how the Jesuits operate the global conspiracy. Now, this is a very important point. Remember, Gary Allen's book is about how global conspiracies operate in the world. We have to see what is being done here using Jesuit casuistry and sophistry. By having the Black Pope, Pedro Arupe, and Gary Allen's book takes the eyes of the Jesuits and allows them to operate the global conspiracy unseen. Because the puppet masters, the Jesuits, are behind the curtain, pulling the strings. It is like the pot calling the kettle black."
I mean, in other words, for anybody, now this applies to most of all your alternative media and mass media, is the misdirection. And like quickly, I can mention Alex Jones. Alex Jones talks about the globalist, the elitist. I mean, continually for 3 hours a day, 60 hours a month, and he never. And everybody that's listened to Alex Jones knows this. And if somebody brings up the word the Jesuits, they are belittled. And he quickly does a character assassination on him right on the air. I mean, in other words, it's not to be talked about. Now, I just want to say this. I'd make a comment in this next year, but imagine how embarrassed. When I read this here, this is one of the reasons I said, I've got to add, I can't believe this. I read that book. I've got it here someplace. I can't put my finger on it right now, but I read that when I was out from 1991 to 2001. I drove truck back and forth across the United States, and I had that book. Now just look at Walt. Look at myself now. Look at how misdirected. That misdirection, I didn't even know what a black pope was.
Not an African.
Right. I had no idea. The Jesuits, you see, even to this day, listeners, and you see the reason for this book connects all the pictures of the puzzle, of the pieces of the puzzle that I have on my website, Grand Design Exposed. See, in other words, if you read this book and then go to my website, I got all the pieces. I got all the pieces there, but I'm not one to try to put the pieces together for you, because I believe in freedom of conscience. I want to go back to the freedom of conscience we learned on the last broadcast. We talked about it, but this is why it's so important to incite research. So anyway, go to the next paragraph there.
Yeah, I will, but before that, I want to make a little intro here. You probably remember Lenin, right? the guy from the October Revolution in the USSR that overthrew the Tsar system and established communism, or socialism, in the USSR in that time. And he was, of course, like everybody else who was placed there, because that revolution was a Jesuit revolution all the way through. And Lenin made a very interesting quote. He said, "The best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves." And that is the point what the Jesuits do, and that is the point that Walt Stickle wanted to point out, and that is very important for you to understand when you turn to people like Alex Jones. He seems to be opposition, but he is controlled. He is controlled opposition, and not only he, but most of the people out there in the so-called truther scene are controlled opposition, and that is just working for their Hegelian dialectic. And then you see the mainstream clashing with the truther scene, or however you want to call it, and out there comes the synthesis. And that is, take all information away. You are not allowed to have any information at all anymore. But any information that you're getting right now also is controlled. The Jesuits control both sides. They control the mainstream and they control the alternative media as well. Only a very, very few alternative media, if I may call it like that, are not controlled. And that is things like this broadcast on Hour of the Truth, I dare tell you. We are not controlled, but we are in danger of being extirpated. That's probably something you knew already. Okay, but I wanted you to make sure that you understand what controlled opposition means and how the Jesuits actually do the control. They just control both sides.
And that's exactly, you just explained exactly whether Gary Allen is part of it, I don't know. But in other words, but to have the Black Pope give you the definition of conspiracy, I mean, anybody that's read that book, you must be saying, Walt, are you for sure? Are you sure that was in Gary Allen's book? Yes, it was. We just didn't know.
But there's so much, Walt, that we can go into that. There are so many authors who are controlled opposition, and I just want to name one. I just want to name one who is very famous, and even in our circles, and that is Eric John Phelps, for example. He is as controlled opposition as most of these writers. And even when you turn to books like from Avro Manhattan, do not forget, he was made a Knight of Malta. Do you really think that he says something that he was not allowed to say? Think about the last broadcast where Tom brought up the subject of Karen Houdis, the whistleblower of the World Bank. She is controlled opposition because she has her own agenda. And that was, as Tom put it, a constitutional, what was the name there, Wolf? Do you get that? What did it say?
Yeah, constitutional. They want to change the constitutional convention. They want a
convention. Yeah, that's it. I didn't come to the word convention. Yeah, a constitutional convention. That's her agenda behind it. She will never tell you that, of course. The same as Alex Jones will never tell you that the Pope is a Jesuit and what the Jesuit actually stands for. He will never tell you that. He will only talk about the Jews and the Zionists and the evil bankers and all that stuff. They all have an agenda they follow, and they all can only reveal so much. They never can reveal everything. So every time, dear listener, every time when you pick up a book, like a book from Avro Manhattan or whatever, and you know that this is the Knight of Malta, be careful when you read that and ask yourself, what's the agenda behind that? Because if the Jesuits did not want that book to get out, it wouldn't have gotten out. And if it even wouldn't have gotten out, it would not be available today anymore. All over the internet, you can download all Avro Manhattan, his books, or almost all Avro Manhattan, his books, free for PDF from the internet. If they really did not want you to have this information, it just wouldn't be there. So always ask yourself, who am I reading? What's his background? And what's his agenda behind that?
And this is a good time to bring this up. This is a prime example. When what we have found here, what Ronald Cook found, I would have never found it if I hadn't got a hold of this booklet. I wouldn't have, I would have never found it. And I wanted to say one thing. I don't like to sling mud. But listen, you mentioned Eric Phelps. Eric Phelps, I'm going to say it boldly. Listen, he's a textbook example of a Jesuit coadjutor. Now, why do I say that? I got to have a reason.
He attacked Tapasausi of being a coadjutor. And you can look up on the internet
Chris
the discussion these two guys had. And Tapasausi called him on that, and he could never, ever in the discussion they had made valid the points that he accused Tapasausi of. That is also the pot calling the kettle black. That's exactly what Eric John Phelps did there. He discredited Tapasausi. And why? Because Tapasausi was discovering or making things known in his book, Rulers of Evil, like the part the Carols played in the founding of the United States of America in 1776 that Eric John Phelps never would dare to speak about.
He left it out of his book. He wrote an 896-page book, and I bought the book, okay, years ago. It cost me $40-some, and I don't have that much money, but I bought that, and I used to listen to Eric Phelps. Now, you see, you got to see how far they go. And I'm using Eric Phelps as a textbook example. It's a textbook example because he eliminates the Carols. Now listen, myself, when I talk about the Carols, I'm not talking to sling mud, okay? They're a historical fact. They're part of the founding of this country. All three of them were Jesuits. Daniel and Charles, at 12 to 14 years over there in, how do you pronounce that? It's in Belgium.
In Liège and in Bruges.
Yes. That's where they were sent overseas as teenagers. And John Carroll received 26 years, and he's a card-carrying Jesuit. There's no doubt about that. That's history. But Charles Carroll and Daniel Carroll go through history sliding through like they were just good Catholics. They were good Jesuits. Okay? And also, I just found this out because I've been doing some more research on the Carrolls. Daniel Carroll also helped Charles Carroll and Daniel Carroll help finance, and listen what I'm saying, and let's say this slow. They helped finance the American Revolution. Follow the money. You see, so in other words, when I bring up the Carrolls and I study the Carrolls, I've got a disclaimer. I've read Ark and the Dove, and I've read some of these books from their own source. I get the best information that I have received and come across comes from Catholic publications. Okay, so and see, in their inner circles, they're not ashamed. They're not ashamed of it. They know. Listen, you can go out into the streets of America today, and you can ask the average person who Charles Carroll is, and they don't have a clue. But that ain't the way it is. And when you get in, you understand the nobility in the Dark Ages controlled. They controlled the civil powers, the nobility. The nobility was Catholic, and it's no different today. It's no different today. And so I just want to say this about Eric Phelps. It's when you see, I don't say this to slander Eric Phelps. Listen, The evidence is in the pudding. You mean you wrote an 896-page book and you leave the carols out of it? That's omission. He explains who he is by omission, and then claims that George Washington was a Baptist. He was a Baptist Christian. It's simply, I just say this real simply, and I've heard Chris Pinto say it. It's simply not true.
It's of course not. He is deified in the painting that you have on the ceiling of the Capitol, and you can go there and look it up for yourself.
And this
the deification of Washington, you have that on the painting on the top of the ceiling in the Capitol, and more than 60 feet high. So you can't watch that from the ground. You have to go a little bit up to see that, but there are also photos to explain that, and also Chris Pinto reveals this. I think it is in the documentary about the hidden face of the Founding Fathers.
He does.
It's out there in the open. You can see that. So that is what I meant. When you are reading people like, okay, I said Avro Manhattan is one point, Eric John Phelps is another. Look, I don't have any grudges against Eric John Phelps himself. I don't know him. I don't know him personally, but I know that what he does, he has an agenda with it. If he didn't have an agenda with it, he would have been killed by now. When you're reading his book and you see what he reveals from the Jesuit order, they would have made him a head shorter.
and he's been mentored. He's been mentored by the Jesuits. He even dressed in the cloak of a Jesuit.
Yeah. When he goes to Conspiracy Con, he goes.
Yes, he's actually
with priest. Yeah.
That is, and in other words, the thing of it is, when you're looking this little article and why we steered off this, we're just amplifying. This little deal that they did with non-dare call it conspiracy is being done over and over and over, and so I want to get into it. We're going to get into it in the next couple of paragraphs. We're going to get into sophistry and casuistry, and I want to make some comments. So go ahead and continue when you're ready there.
Okay, I will continue by repeating the last paragraph that I just read and then go on. The book Non-Direct Conspiracy is taking the focus of the real conspiracy by using the Black Pope Petro Arupe to give us the definition of conspiracy. This takes my breath away as I read this. Doesn't it take away yours? Why? I read Gary Allen's book in 1993, and at the time I knew nothing about the Jesuits. But let's look how they operate using Jesuit casuistry and sophistry. What is the explanation of casuistry? Many people haven't probably even heard that word, and when they heard it, they maybe don't even understand it. So here's an explanation what casuistry is about. Casuistry is dishonest reasoning on questions of morality by application of general principles like same-sex marriage, abortion, or a future antichrist. Casuistry is a system of rationalization to do legally what is forbidden morally. End quote. So, Walt, do your explanation on casuistry a little bit deeper that you want to.
And I want to comment after because casuistry and sophistry go together.
Yeah, of course they go together. Yeah.
So read the definition of sophistry, and then I want to comment at the end here. Okay.
Sophistry, the art of influencing the thought and conduct of an audience by argumentation that is seemingly plausible, but is actually invalid and misleading. Like 9/11 and the government's version of what happened. Or like the assassination of JFK and the lone gunman story that was told to the general public. Remember, the lone gunman story is being taught as fact in the educational systems of the world. It seemingly sounds plausible, but it's actually a lie.
And what I want to comment and stop a little bit is I want to mention 9/11. It's a textbook explanation and definition of Jesuit casuistry and sophistry. In other words, now I want to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you what happened that day. And people say, well, we're going to go on for hours and hours. No, the buildings turned to dust and fell in their place. Now, if you've got to stop. The evidence is in that the two buildings did disappear. Okay. Now this gets right into sophistry. See, the art of influence the thought and conduct of an audience by argumentation that is seemingly plausible, but is actually invalid and misleading. In other words, it pancake. And listen, each building was 500,000 tons. And if those buildings had a collapsed pancake, there'd have been when those 110 stories collapsed, there'd have been 41 stories of debris. In other words, and how many? This amazes me. By the way, I had Judy Wood's book, Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go? And so I've read what happened that day, because her book is like this. People want to, you know why I bought the book? Because I found out that Alex Jones was demonizing her. I said, well, I've got to have the book now. I've got to have the book.
That's the best motivation, Walt. When somebody says, well, this is ridiculous, and you surely got to look at it.
Especially when Alex Jones, he went out of his way, buddy. He wouldn't talk to her. Judy Wood was not allowed on his broadcast, okay? But listen, I'm going to tell you two events there that happened that people don't know. I say to people, do you realize that there was 14 survivors in Tower 2? No. Now think about it. You're at the bottom of a 110-story building. Now think about it. And the building collapses. And they were over in a corner of Tower 2, see. Just if you'll remember the pictures, there's one little corner that was standing. Well, they happened to be in that stairwell at the bottom. They were going down the stairwell. Some of them weren't in the bottom. Some of them fell from, in all this dust, floated like a butterfly. I don't know how they survived, but I know they did. I've listened to eyewitnesses. I've listened to them. I've read their explanations. Eyewitnesses.
There were also Jesuit priests who survived Ground Zero in Hiroshima, right?
Yeah. But okay. Now let's just they survived. And one other point, you see, they told us that they hauled all the metal out of those buildings, and they took it to China. There wasn't the metal. There was 47 beams, and they turned to dust. Watch the videos again. Go up and watch some videos, and when you see the things when it's supposedly being pancaked and you see debris being thrown out, watch the debris.
I guess China needed all that steel for the car industry right now.
Yes, they said it went to China. There wasn't enough steel to make a Volkswagen.
Yeah, but probably the Chinese car that you're driving right now, or that Mercedes that has been built over there in China, is made of steel.
Oh, they made a few bicycles, maybe. They made
bicycles.
And there's one other thing that if you haven't had Judy Wood's book, and if you, because what she did is explain what happened that day. And I'm going to tell you another event that if you've never read Judy Wood's book, you don't know this happened. If you were listening to the mass media, they didn't tell you this part. There were 1,500 jumpers. They were jumping out of there 4 seconds at a time. Every 4 or 5 seconds, they were raining people for a while. One fireman was killed from a falling victim. And this is what was happening. At the bottom, they were exploding. That isn't natural. People fall from airplanes. They jump from airplanes. The parachute doesn't open. They break every bone in their body. And there's even been survivors of people that jump out of an airplane and land in a marshy area or something. They have survived jumping from an airplane. But 1,500 jumpers. And what was happening? I'm not going to go into that. We're not going to go there. But listen, this was Jesuit casuistry and sophistry, and they got away with it. Now, the next two, I give an example with Tupper Saucy. So go ahead and let Tupper Saucy tell us exactly what is happening to us.
Let's have a look of how the two, casuistry and sophistry, work together to mislead and deceive you. Casuistry is dishonest reasoning, to open up the door to sophistry as a method of argument. How far has Jesuit casuistry and sophistry infiltrated our world? Below is a quote from Tupper Saucy's book, Rulers of Evil. On chapter 9, page 74, we can read, quote, America's understanding has been systematically bent to the will of the church militant, while the intellectual means for sensing the capture have been disconnected. Most of the content of modern media, whether television, and where was 9/11 all over the place, radio, print, film, stage, or web, is state-of-the-art Jesuit ratio studiorum. And for that you have to read the whole chapter 9 to understand the Jesuit ratio studiorum. And very interesting chapter of that book.
Let me interrupt too. Ratio studiorum is not in the dictionary. It's in the Catholic Encyclopedia. That's a Catholic word.
Absolutely. The Jesuit College is no longer just a chartered institution. It has become our entire social environment. The movies, the mall, the school, the home, the mind. Human experience has become a spiritual exercise. Spiritual exercises founded by Ignatius of Loyola, managed by charismatic spiritual directors who know how to manipulate a democracy's emotions. Logic, perspective, national memory, and self-discipline are purged to the point that unbridled emotional responses, as economist Thomas Sowell put it, are all we have left. Unbridled emotional responses are all we have left. End quote. Yeah, Walt, do your explanation.
Well, I've read that paragraph many times, and you have to go back and look at the definition of casuistry and sophistry, but I think it can't be said any better than what Tupper Saucy just said there.
I agree.
In the next couple of paragraphs, we're going to comment, but I'll let you read those, and then we're going to comment. We're going to be talking about the cover now. So go ahead and continue.
I want to reflect on the picture that is on the cover of this booklet. It comes out of the book Washington and the Lap of Rome, 1888, by the author Justin D. Fulton. Understand, this was on the page before the picture in his original book in 1888. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And we will give you the link, of course, that you can open that up and have a look at that picture of yourself, or I will put it in the video that I make of this broadcast. But now, read the words and look at the cover. It reveals 2015. Quote, "Two Americans who will aid in throttling Jesuitism, in uncoiling the serpent encircling the capital of the United States, and in taking Washington out of the lap of Rome, that a free church and a free school in a free state may make the great republic the glory of the world." End quote. And this book, Washington in the Lap of Rome, is dedicated in prayer and hope by Justin D. Fulton in 1888. You want to make a comment right here, or shall I go on reading, Walt?
Well, yeah, I want to make a comment now on the cover. When I started putting this together, I'm not an author. I'm really not an author. And so, so I struggle when I try to describe things with words. It takes me a lot of time. But so I try to do it with pictures. So on the cover, understand this cover is on the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. I'm the one that put this up here. Because it wasn't on his original book. his original booklet. But the reason this is up here is because Justin D. Fulton is telling us something that's came to pass. Can you imagine Justin D. Fulton if somebody say, did you know that a Jesuit Pope was coming to speak to a joint session of Congress? Stop and think. This man wrote this in 1888. And he says, to Americans who will aid in throttling Jesuitism, everything that he said has come to pass. And that's why I put the Pope's picture at the top. The original picture, that's the way it was. All I did is superimpose Francis on the page and put 2015, because this booklet pertains now everything that Justin D. Fulton has said. And Ronald Cook is explaining about the history and the Jesuits today has come to pass. And we're getting a little bit of it right now in Baltimore as we speak. So anyway, you can continue.
Prior to the American Revolution, Catholics in the 13 colonies were forbidden to vote or to hold a political office because of the centuries-old conflict between Rome and Protestant England. Protestant England, Walt just did a partial read of the Royal Declaration, and we will go into that later in this book.
But I want to make a comment. I'm going to make a comment. You said Protestant England. Now reread that and pronounce the word right. Protestant.
Protestant England. Yeah. Okay.
See, well, the thing of it is, we got.
Yeah, you have to get used to the other pronunciation. You know.
Yes, we in other words, we've been. In other words, when you learn this all your life, to turn that around, it takes some help. It takes some help. So continue.
But once the revolution was over and universal toleration was declared, the agents of Romanism immediately went to work to claim this country on behalf of the Pope. Fulton argued that the ancient conflict that had been responsible for the bloody horrors of the Dark Age had indeed come to the shores of the New World. Incredibly, Fulton actually believed that Rome might be able to resurrect the Inquisition on American soil if the people were not awakened to the imminent danger. Was there any truth to his warning? Now, with that fresh in our minds, we have understanding and what it means to have a Jesuit Pope coming to speak to a joint session of Congress on September 23, 2015. We now can see Justin D. Fulton's warning has come to pass. Now look at the cover, and there is 1,000 words on the cover. The serpent has entwined its folds about the Capitol.
And I want to, before you read the next paragraph, I should have, I'm the one that writing this. I should maybe a little more of an introduction. Who Brigadier General Thomas M. Harris, 1897. He's an author of Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But read what men in this era said about Rome. Read what he says about Rome.
Brigadier General Thomas M. Harris said in 1897, Rome is simply a political machine for the enslavement of mankind. It is a monstrous despotism, relying on ignorance and its natural offspring, superstition, for its support. It is not a religion that we are called upon to fight, but a corrupt and most dangerous political organization whose purpose is nothing short of the destruction of our government. Whatever it may be as a religion does not concern our present contention. The booklet, The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, with the light of 2015, we will find Ronald Cook's to be very profound, and we will be able to connect the dots with the real conspiracy. the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. Now let's clear our minds of any preconceived idea and let biblical and historical history reveal the Vatican Jesuit global conspiracy. In Revelation chapter 17, verse 5, we read, quote, "And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." Unquote. Yeah. You have some comments here, Walt?
I was looking for it, and I can't put my finger on it right now. But I can. Cardinal Gibbons, he was a cardinal there in Baltimore, Maryland, during when the assassination of President Lincoln. He lived in that era, but he comes right out in his book, The Faith of Our Fathers, and tells us in point blank, coming from a cardinal, that Rome is the new Babylon. Now, I didn't say that. I mean, that's an actual code, and see, that should be there. See, that's something that, as I'm going through this, when you're writing a book or like this, you know, and you're painting the pictures with words. See, that should be right below Revelation 17:5.
Yeah, that is very well explained. What you just said is very well explained in the first chapter of Rulers of Evil, that we will come to later when you made your amendment to the booklet that Ron wrote here.
Yes, and I think I might even have it later on. But so now we're getting ready. I just want to say the preface. Now, this is what you've heard up until now is my introduction, writing the introduction, because remember, Ronald Cook wrote this 30 years ago. So here's the preface, and now this is Ronald Cook speaking. We only have 5 minutes, but I'll let you know when so go ahead and continue.
Okay, starting with the preface of the book. In this booklet, we try to sketch the role that the Vatican plays in world politics today, 1985, and the goal and plan it has for the world. We also look at the enormous financial resources that the Vatican possesses and the billions more which are at its disposal. We also look at the part that the Jesuits play in helping to implement the goal of the Vatican. Sorry. In our travels and teaching, we find that there is almost a total blackout concerning the sinister aspirations of the Vatican and the Jesuits. Men who purport to write on the great conspiracy that is out to control the world not only never mention the Vatican, but if they do, they make the Vatican out to be the largest of the conspiracy rather than the originator of the conspiracy.
Yes. Let me read that last half. But if they do, they make the Vatican out to be the target of the conspiracy rather than the originator of the conspiracy.
Yeah, the Vatican has always to ask for gifts. It is so poor. It has no money. It has no power. Help the poor Pope to help the people.
Yes, I mean, that is a powerful statement. That's the reason why this little booklet grabbed me, because he's very descriptive, and of course he's very knowledgeable. He's mentored. He knows Protestant history. I'm Ronald Cook.
I will just read the next paragraph, and then we have to close our broadcast for today.
Okay.
It's obvious to anyone who is even remotely interested in the Vatican conspiracy that times have certainly changed the attitudes of Protestants, Christians towards the Jesuits. The word Jesuit used to conjure up in the minds of those who heard it malevolent and satanic rictus. But times have changed. Today, Jesuits are accorded reverence and respect in all segments of Western society, and yes, even allowed back into Eastern society after being banned from countries like China for almost 30 years. Okay, I'm done here with the last paragraph, and I think it is time to make a final remark, Walt, and then bring this reading down to a close.
Yes, it is. Because we only got 2 minutes. We might be running it short. So anyway, you go ahead and close it.
Okay. We were starting today on the conclusion of the sodomy of Rome by explaining to you the importance of the King James Bible, Psalm 115, and also I advise you to read Acts chapter 19. That's also interesting in that point. And then we went on, starting to reading and analyzing, including the foreword that Walt Sticker wrote himself on the book from Dr. Ronald Cook from 1985, the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. We will continue doing this next week probably, or some earlier time, but you can go down to the site that is provided in the box, in the description box of the video, where you can find the TalkShoe website where always new broadcasts are announced. And I thank you all very much for the attention. I thank Walt Stickle not only for his contribution to this broadcast, but also for writing this interesting foreword to the book of Dr. Ronald Cook and providing it, and also giving us his very interesting explanation of conscience and what it all contains and what it all should contain to you. I thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you next time. And in the meantime, God bless you. Do your own studies, do your own research, and you will find the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Well, thank you very much for listening. God bless you, and bye-bye. Bye. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of Hour of the Truth on the 30th of April, 2015. And we will now go into the reading of the book, The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. And I will start with the introduction that was written by Walt Stickle from Grand Design Exposed in the beginning. And we will get through the whole book, but of course not today in all at once. I start reading, and whenever Walt thinks that he has something to add here to, then he will come and fill in the gaps that I maybe leave on here. So, the introduction of the book, The Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy. When reading this booklet, remember, Ronald Cook wrote this in 1985.
The book, and I read it years ago. None dare call it conspiracies. What is amazing is the misdirection. The misdirection. I had to ask several people. Am I reading this right? Is the Black Pope actually saying this? And now this is before York reads what the Black Pope said. This is in a book that's exposing conspiracies, blaming the globalists, blaming the elitists, blaming the bankers. It was a very popular book back in 1971. I didn't even know who
the world did not have a Jesuit pope. The founding of the Jesuits in 1534 was to counter the Reformation. Now, on September 23rd, 2015, a Jesuit pope, or a counter-reformator, is coming to America to speak to a joint session of Congress. What does this tell us in 2015? It reveals that the Christians are under a strong delusion with the teaching of futurism and are unaware that the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist is coming to address the lawmakers to celebrate the completion of the Jesuit counter-reformation in America. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. Quote, "And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth." Ronald Cook mentions author Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, using the Black Pope, Pedro Arrupe, to identify conspiracies and give us the agenda of the conspirators. Here's a quote from the Black Pope, Jesuit Pedro Arrupe.
This quote, I want to stop right there. I want to lay a little foundation because, listen, you know, when I read this is in his book. I'm bringing it up in the introduction so we have a clear head when Ronald Cook mentions it in his first chapter of the book. Understand, the listeners that are here, most of them understand who the Black Pope is. But York is getting the next two paragraphs as an actual quote from the Black Pope, and Gary Allen, and I have a picture of the cover of
that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. End quote. Now understand, this introduction is not to take away from the author and the points made in his booklet. But remember, the author didn't know that in 2013 we would have a Jesuit Pope. When writing the Vatican Jesuit Global Conspiracy, he had no idea that in 2015 the Jesuits would have complete charge of the Vatican and the Jesuit Pope would speak to a joint session of Congress in 2015. So when you read this, realize that the conspiracy is alive and well and proceeding on schedule. Now, Pedro Arupa, the Black Pope between 1963 to 1983, is mentioned on page 8, chapter 1, the Jesuits in History, in this booklet.